Rob, thank you for being on the Ride Boundless podcast. Thank you for making it in the afternoon. Where are you coming from?
Pleasure. West Hollywood.
West Hollywood? Oh, yeah, that could be a little daunting. Laurel Canyon?
Yeah. Man, that road.
Yeah.
That road. It's so busy, right?
It's crazy. It's crazy because you don't even notice it, like, until it's nighttime and there's no traffic. And you're like, wait a minute, this is like a 7-minute drive. Like, 7-10 minute drive. But during the day, it's daunting. It's like a 40-minute drive. Right. And it's what, 5 miles?
5 miles. You're close to Jaime as well, right?
Yeah. He's down the street. Yeah, he's down the street. The closer you pull the mic back just a little bit.
Yep.
And we were just talking about how we met. We met through Jaime invited us, and we went to the LAFC the match, which was it was a great experience, man.
Yeah. And you were educating me on the chat API, I think it was.
Oh yeah.
Amazing.
Have you played with it?
I have. Yeah, it's great.
Isn't it
incredible?
What have you done with it?
I did I actually put one of my scripts, obviously from a movie level.
Yeah.
I fed that in there just to kind of see what it would do if I said, make it funnier, right? Yeah. And it did. And it was kind of arguable what actually is funnier, right? What was already there or what they actually did with it. But it's very cool, man, I got to say.
It's insane, but like, it's all about the commands, because if you could also say, make it funnier as if Joe Rogan was telling the joke, or make it more intricate like, Steve Jobs would on a project for, and you tell it, you say, take the identity of, Mark Cuban, as a business developer, and now you're going to be my marketing manager, and I need you to come up with a campaign along with a blog and a script. And it fucking does this. It's
madness.
It's super fucking madness. And I know it's going to replace a lot of jobs, because obviously they're comparing it back to the conversation we had before, which was, what is that? Like before, we were talking about how Amazon went automated and they fired a bunch of people. This is going to take a lot of copywriters and marketing people.
It's the future, though, right?
It's the future, but look at how many tools it provides for creative. Yeah, it's like you either adapt to it or you just say, "Fuck this! This is my enemy. I don't want nothing to do with it."
I think there's going to have to be some adaptation done for sure, right? Because it feels like that's the way the world is moving overall, right?
Yeah.
Are you hearing me okay? Is it dipping in and dipping out?
That's why you got to be a little closer. Yeah,
that's better.
Yeah, because otherwise I'll try to pick up some sounds.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what I like about the headphones, because we can see we can hear what's going on.
Yeah, that's perfect. You can hear me all right now, right?
Yeah, I can hear it perfectly.
All right.
Yeah, I've been using this for so many things now, like responding emails. One thing that happened to me was, there was this dude that was kind of bothering me, and he was writing me. And it was getting really annoying and daunting. And I was like, you need to stop. And they're like, no, you need to respond to us. And I was like, I don't. Anyways, I had an attorney friend. I was like, dude, can you just get this guy off my ass? And he's like, oh man, yeah, I could do it, but it's like, I got to type up emails and make phone calls and this, that, $5,000. Right. I was like, $5,000. Chat GBT, I was like, hey, get this guy off my ass. Here's the last email. Never heard back. This was like 3-4 months ago. And I was hearing from this person like once a week. And done. Yeah. Done. Like shut down as a citizen of America. You're not complying, blah, blah, blah. Stop. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Actually,
I love that.
And one more funny story is, I just read an article that the first AI attorney is getting sued by attorneys for practicing law without a license.
Oh, how? I love that. Yeah, that must be the software developer getting sued, though, right? How does that work?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's so cool, though. Great story, man. I mean, I think that's obviously the future, and there's going to be so many pitfalls with it, and so much development which needs to happen to kind of hone these things, right? So they provide. I mean, it's the same, I guess, in terms of Uber and those kind of things, right? Just in terms of how things have actually evolved, where you are having to, things are changing, the world and the landscape changes, right? Right. And suddenly we're going to be driving electric cars, like we talked about when we were Jaime, right? The car drives itself now, things like that. And I think that's the future. It's going to be less of us actually being able to do that physical kind of work. And it's going to be a situation where from our perspective, you either have to, it's like when you get onto Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, you have to either kind of embrace it, or sometimes you just kind of get left behind, right? And I think that's going to be one of the things with AI, right? I think somehow it's coming and it's going to be here to stay, and we're going to have to get on that train. Otherwise, it's you're going to get left behind, right?
Yeah, it's just so impressive how they introduced this in November and how fast it's adapted to everybody's life right now. Like, this is the number one thing talked about everywhere.
Yeah,
every social media post, every news article, has something with Trump's getting arrested and ChatGPT.
Yeah,
like that's like, and then Biden fell again or whatever.
Yeah,
but it's I don't know. I just paid like $100 just for, it was like 1,000 commands to tell ChatGPT on how to write stuff. And it's, you could say it has a mode called Dan, and Dan stands for like, it's ChatGPT's evil brother comes out.
Right. The dark side, right?
The dark side. And you could start writing, like, there's so many movie
That's
ideas.
so good.
Yeah, they're like I was reading about your history and your films and stuff, which we'll get into, but like, you could write totally a fucking movie about this.
Yeah, it sounds like a horror film straight away, right?
Straight out.
Yeah.
Straight out. And how fast it's learning, and then once they create machines, and the machines start. There was a piece of artwork, since I have this artwork and we're talking about this. There was a piece of artwork, I forgot what it was called, but it was a machine that they created with a certain amount of oil to function.
Right.
Okay, but the machine, the creator created the machine with a leak, so it's leaking oil, but the robot knows it's leaking oil, and it has it's like an excavator, and it's grabbing the oil to like refill to live, because it knows that if it runs out of oil, it's done.
That's very cool, right?
Yeah. It's very cool. But it's sad, because you're like, fuck, this thing's fighting to survive. Like, it's constantly like, and obviously the oil gets further and further, and they can't get it to where they want it to be. It's kind of, but it's beautiful and sad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beautiful because it's just a machine. Like, get over it, guys. But it's sad because you read it and you're like, whoa.
You're on the money, though. I mean, there's definitely something around that from a project level I could see happening. I remember I got pitched a movie at one point by this. It was a horror film, and it was about GPS. What would happen if you got in the car and the GPS basically took over and just killed everyone that got in the car? So it would direct them off a cliff and stuff like that, right? And it was quite cool, but I kind of always was looking at thinking, is it sustainable? Is it one gag and then the audience kind of knows what they're into, right? And then they kind of lose interest. But I can see the same thing when you're talking about chat, right? Same sort of thing, where you can kind of come at those things early and say that it's the ghost in the machine, right, in terms of what you're trying to achieve there. But this is the world we're getting into: robots and
self-driving cars,
and that's the world. And as I said, you just got to get into it. I mean, you see this stuff on YouTube with the flying guys and these days over in Dubai, and flying policemen and stuff like that. It's just nuts, man, in terms of the way the world's moving. But that's technology, right? It's just crazy these days.
Yeah, it's wild. I got a one-liner movie idea that I've had this thing forever. But again, it was I had a buddy of mine. He makes films. He's like, but then what happens in the movie, Robert? Right?
Yeah.
But I've always been, and this I've been hanging on to this for like 15 years. But it's like opening scene, New York. Cameras going down a building into a Chinese restaurant.
Right.
Chinese restaurant opens up, and there's people walking with food back and forth. Camera goes all the way to the back of the room, and there's a meeting between a corporate company, I don't know, whatever, 7-8 people, and they're talking and bullshitting. We closed the deal, and we did this, and and Steve, how did you do that? And her face, right? Whatever. And then they're laughing, and then one of the guys goes, I gotta get out of here. We just had the kid, blah blah blah. I'm late. So he's running out, and right before he runs out, somebody says, "Hey, don't forget your fortune cookie." Like. It's a Chinese restaurant. So he's like, oh, thanks, haha. So anyways, he's walking out. He's putting on his jacket. As he walks outside, he opens up the fortune cookie, and he's walking, and it opens and says, you're going to die, and a bus fucking hits him. Done.
Dude, I love it. It's good.
Now I don't know what happens after that. Is it cursed?
Dude, I'm doing a movie right now with the creator of Final Destination.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
That's that movie.
That could
right?
be a scene right there.
It feels like that fits in that world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. I like it.
Let's talk about
See where it progresses to, though, right? What's the story?
Exactly. Yeah. What happened before? What happened afterwards? You
Yeah,
know, like
yeah.
I never got past that. You
Yeah.
know, so it's like what they call a one-liner. A one-liner.
Yeah, but
pitch.
you know, those are the acorns where projects develop from, right? In terms of the way I look at projects, is when I get given something, or if it's from my genesis, I always have to look at it, and there has to be something which I'm attracted to, or I jump into, and it can be an idea like that, concept like that, or a scene like that. But I have to be able to visualize the trailer, and I have to be able to visualize the poster, right? And then I can see how it might translate to people, right? Something like that. It definitely feels like it could be a horror film. It definitely feels like it could be a Final Destination, or something like The Ring, where there's something which continues as a vessel, whether it's the fortune cookie or it's something like that. But that's kind of how I always look at stuff, right? There has to be something which inspires, and it makes you start talking, thinking, right?
Yeah.
And then you think you might have something, and you've got to develop it and work it and hone it. And you know, sometimes it's like a cocktail, right? You put the ingredients in it, either tastes good or it tastes shit.
Yeah.
That could be good or it could be shit. It just depends how you mold it and develop it and test it and try things with it, right?
Yeah.
But I like it. I like the premise. I like it felt very visual in terms of the way you're talking about it. Yeah, I mean, there could be an infringement on copyright on this, right? We're going on video.
My God, it's yours.
Yeah. I love it, man. But that's good. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how certain movies get done that you think are not going to work and end up working. And then the ones that you think are going to work don't work. And then you have movies like Sharknado.
Yeah.
And it's not Sharknado that's like, wow. It's like, no, it's part 2, part 3, part 4. I think they went to like, what, part 4 or 5?
Yeah.
And it's like, how does that happen?
And you know, and the thing with movies like that is they're so bad, they're good, right? And the audience knows what they're kind of getting into in terms of they're in on the joke. I went to a screening, probably about maybe a month ago, and have I told you about this? And it was a Winnie the Pooh movie, right? Did I tell you about this? And it was a Winnie the Pooh movie. And the reason I went to it is I know the cinematographer, and he was like a guy from the UK, and he was in town. He said that we're premiering this film. And we made this film for nothing, right? 50 grand they made this movie for, which is insane, right? Yeah. What you can do.
That's a YouTube video.
It's just insane. They shot it in 8 days, and they were talking to the crowd at the beginning. It was like a special screening I went to. And they opened the whole thing up by saying, hey guys, we want to introduce you to the film. It's called Blood and Honey, Winnie the Pooh, I think it's called. And we made this movie for 8 days. It's not very good, but just go with it because it only cost us 50 grand. That was their opening pitch. The whole crowd laughed, and it was almost like you were in on the joke, right? When it went to a slightly cornier area, or you realize there's probably a plot hole. They didn't have enough days to shoot that or cover that. The audience laughed. And I think they opened in Mexico, did like a 1.5 million in the first week. It was number 2 at the box office here in the US.
Blood and Honey.
Blood and Honey. And I was like, wow. I mean, see, when I started in horror. So I know that genre very well.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say, real quick, you did horror, thrillers, comedy, drama, and action. You've done them all.
I did them all.
You started in horror.
The first film I was going to do was... So when I went to film school, I kind of realized quite quickly it was one of those things where everyone goes to film school and everyone wants to be a director. That's kind of what happens. You go there and you think you're going to be the next Steven Spielberg. The reality is we all do different things. We have to figure out what works best for us and our skill set. For me, I didn't know I wanted to be a producer. Someone had to point that out to me. It's like, your best skill set, you should be a producer. So I kind of fell into that. But whilst I was at film school, they gave us kind of carte blanche on equipment, right? So you could take their equipment out and shoot stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So I would take their equipment and go and shoot videos, like corporate videos and branded content stuff, it's called now, or music promos, and started to make some money kind of doing that. And was almost self-teaching myself, because on the course you didn't really learn how to produce. You were kind of just learning everything but that, right? French New Wave cinema and all this kind of stuff. And I kind of came to the conclusion that for me, I would I could do that stuff. I could learn about that stuff in my own time. But what I really need to know was how to produce, how to do things, right?
Right.
So the first film I was going to do, so on the back of that, I raised some money from my own promos, and I put it into music promos and corporates. I put it into launching my production company. And the first film I was going to do was a movie called Where Love Reigns, right? Which is probably not on your research, right?
It is actually. It? Yeah.
It is, right? So that was the first one I was going to do. And it was about Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. It was psychoanalysis. And get this, as a baptism of fire, right? It was Martin Scorsese. It was Keira Knightley, Alan Rickman.
I got that.
It was bonkers. That was my entry point. And that film, we had 2 years of trying to make it, and we lost all the finance, tax credits fell apart, and all this kind of boring stuff. But the reality was, we realized that the film was, the market was scholars, because it was Freud and Jung, and we hadn't actually made a film which was commercial enough to be able to, exploit it. So that film died a death. We didn't finish it, never got done. It was just developed, and then we just ended the thing. We ran out of money. The option.
That's crazy that happens.
Yeah, we spent 150 grand. We raised, shot a teaser at Ealing Studios, flew the actresses over. A great actress, Sarah Gadden from Canada, super talented, and Douglas Henshaw from the UK. Shot this teaser. We took it out, tried to sell it. We had a girl called Reiko Bradley, fantastic sales agent, who was just sold Monster. With Charlize Theron, which had won the Oscar, so that everything was lined up, right?
Yeah.
And then we just couldn't get it over the line. Every time we got closer, financing fell apart, or we lost Keira Knightley, and this thing would kind of continually happen. And the option was like, I don't know what we were spending. It was like 20 grand every 6 months, and the option payment was coming up again. And I'm looking at my bank balance coming straight out of university, and music videos. I'm not doing so many of those now. And suddenly, and my girlfriend at the time is kind of saying, hey, where's the money going, kind of thing.
What's her name? Who is she?
Yeah. I'm not with her. I'm happily married now. But it was one of those things where you're getting faxes through at 3 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't create a great home environment. And then the film didn't happen, right?
Faxes. So what's a fax?
So, yeah, there you go, right? And there's another horror film. So it kind of got to a point where I had to make a decision. And my decision was, I'm not going to renew that option, which was really painful, having spent 2 years trying to develop this thing, and backwards and forwards. But I had a really great mentor in the business, a guy called Tim Hampton.
For 20th Century Fox.
20th Century Fox. He'd done Aliens, Chariots of Fire. He was the guy who brought Superman to the studios. And I would, because when you come into the film business, I always use this analogy, like you always feel like you're a boxer, but who can't actually be in the ring and fight. You're just kind of standing outside waiting to have your fight, right? Trying to get in that ring. And it's always that way until you actually produce something. Otherwise, you can walk down the road and I can tell you I'm a producer, but unless I've actually done it, I've never been in the ring properly, right? And so it's after spending 2 years developing this thing, it was like, God, it was hell. And one of the things which I did to try and legitimize myself from a confidence level at the beginning, because you don't know anything. You don't know the business is, I knew nobody in the business, right, when I began. Absolutely no one. So it was like, what can I do to give me some sort of advantage? You're calling up agents and saying, hey, I've got this film. Would you read it to see if your client wants to do it? And they're just like, no. And it's not a great place to be. So what I decided I would do was educate myself, right? So I took subscriptions out to Variety and Screen International, which is the equivalent in the UK, but like Hollywood Reporter. And I would have a ritual every week, which I'd sit in my bath every Thursday night, and I would get the magazine and I'd read it page, cover to cover. And every word I didn't understand, I'd stop and I'd research it. And it started to give me kind of confidence, because I was suddenly educating myself that I would know about what was happening in Poland or Bulgaria, and I'd be able to go into meetings and bring that information, and other people didn't have that knowledge. Yeah. So it gave me a lot of confidence. But it boomeranged on me when the film I was doing, Where Love Reigns, I decided I wasn't going to renew it. About 4 or 5 years on, I was doing my ritual. Screen International comes through the post, sit in the bath, haven't looked at it, front cover. Freud Jung movie, Dangerous Method it was called. Oscar buzz. That was my movie.
Really?
Right. Yeah. And I remember it had Keira Knightley, it had Sarah Gadon, the girl I flew over to be in my teaser. It had my Canadian co-producer, Marty Katz. Love them all. They're all great people, and they made what they wanted to do was a great movie.
But they made this without you, or
different? It was a different.
But were you aware that?
I knew that the project had gone, and it wasn't exactly the same. It's like when you have two scripts of the same subject. One was a stage play, and one was a fictional version which this guy had created, and they optioned a different version, right? So it was kind of brutal on one level because they were absolutely fine to do it, and their version was probably a better version than what we did. We almost planted an acorn with this great idea, because actors and directors and filmmakers want to make movies about people who are important in history, and Freud and Ewing were super important people. So I think from a subject matter and from a character level, it was something which people wanted to explore. But the thing is, just before I was making the decision to ditch the project, I was looking at it and thinking, I can't do it. I can't spend another 20 grand on this thing to just keep going on the hope that we're going to figure this out, right? And I entered this project because of a director, right? The director had reached out to myself and said, look, he had a producer on it who had passed away, and he didn't know what he was going to do, where he was going to go with it. And he reached out to me and he said, look, would you help me, right? And I said, I'll come on and help you. So he was the reason why I was doing the project, right? First-time director. And when the option was coming for renewal, I remember saying to my partner on it, I said, I'm not going to renew it. I just can't do it. Financially, it's just crushed me. So real baptism of fire. And he was like, yeah, I agree with you. And I said, well, there's only, there's only one way we're going to probably make this film now, is to change the director. And that's not something I'm prepared to do, because that's just how it is, right? It's the way I entered it, and it's the way I'm going out. Simple as that. I'm a guy who I say what I do and do what I say. And I entered it because of this guy. I'm going to go out because of this guy. And I told him, the director, that I wasn't going to renew it. And he comes to me and he says, what happens if I don't direct it? If I step aside? And I said, well, if you want to do that, then that's up to you, right? I'm never going to ask you to do that. You have to be comfortable that you want to do that. And because the option payment's coming up, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so I then said, look, I'll make one call, right? And I'll call, if you're game with it and we're doing it together, I'll make one call to my Canadian partner, and I have an idea. David Cronenberg, right? We'll see if we can get David Cronenberg to direct. He's a masterful director. And my Canadian partner had just done a movie with him. So I knew the relationship was there. And I called Marty and I said, what do you think about Cronenberg? And he said, maybe, let me talk to him, right? He spoke to Cronenberg, and Cronenberg was doing Spider, this movie at the time. And Cronenberg came back and was like, look, yeah, I like the sound of the project, but I'm not available for like 4 years or something like that. And for me, it was like, we're done. Right, that was it, we're done. So when the film, this other version of the movie got made, A Dangerous Method, director was David Cronenberg, right? The lead actress was Keira Knightley. It was Michael Fassbender, Viggo Mortensen, Sarah Gadon, the actress, as I said, I flew over, my Canadian partner on it. And I didn't, I knew that the project happened, but I thought, it was one of those moments where you think, did I just completely threw away an Oscar on my first movie? That was my mindset.
Ouch.
And so I called my mentor and I said to him, Tim, what do I take from this, right? I feel sore about the whole thing. And he says to me, it was great advice. He said, trust your instinct. It wasn't your time. It wasn't your time. But your instinct's going to get you there, right? And it was something which made me think, all right, so he's right. I had the instinct. It was a good project, but I wasn't ready, right? So it wasn't my time. So it was one of those stories where I think at the end of it, there's a bit of a silver lining, because what it did do for me is it made me, I need to shoot something. I need to make a movie because I know I can do this. My instinct's right. I'm educated, but I need to make a movie, right? So for me, it then became a scenario of how do I do that? Because the traditional routes of financing films is difficult, and it's still difficult till this very day, right? And today I produce 15 movies now, but it's tough, every one of them, putting them together.
What was it? Budgeting totaling over 70 million.
Probably 100 now.
Now,
I think.
right?
Yeah. But the first one I did was on the back of this. I had no money. I was just completely done. Right? It was like I have to go and get a job. So, and at the time, this will give you a time stamp of when this was. This was around the time of Napster. Do you remember that? Napster and LimeWire. So music video budgets, when you're doing stuff for $100,000 and shooting them in 2 weeks, and you're making 10% back in the day, it's good money. And then suddenly you're in a world where those budgets, because of Napster and LimeWire, are completely slashed, and you're into a world where budgets are now $10,000, right? So your 10% fee at that point's nominal, right? And to add to that, a lot of the labels are then taking the budgets internally and making their own videos, right? So around that time, you start to see music videos. There was no big videos really being made. So I ended up getting a job, any job I could get, just to get some money coming in. I did it for 18 months, and it was nothing to do with the business. It was consultancy, managing temporary labour spend for the governments in the UK, Richmond County Council and Wandsworth. And
wow,
it was completely
far
different.
off track. Yeah.
Yeah. But what was great with it was that they gave me, I had to manage my own diary, right? And managing my own diary and working remotely, I was able to I literally would sit there with my laptop on the film and my laptop on this business, my BlackBerry on that business, my BlackBerry on the film business. And I would do both of them at the same time. Not that they ever knew this, right? Until probably this moment.
Right.
And, you know, but it was, I accumulated holiday whilst I was working for this company. And I financially got myself back to a point where I was like, okay, I can breathe for a bit. And in my holiday, I shot my first film, which I financed going door to door, just running around, anyone I could meet, put $500 in, put $1,000 in.
Which I'm going to interrupt real quick. How much of making movies is raising money?
Yeah, it's a lot of that. It's a lot of it.
If you're going to make movies, like that's what some people don't understand. If you're going to make movies, you're going to be knocking on doors, asking for money.
Yeah. It's a lot of that. And what you start to realize is that every film, depending on which game you're in, if you're in the studio world or if you're in the independent world, it's different, right? There's different ways to skin the cat, so to speak. An indie movie, I always work on the basis you need some sort of equity in each project to make it make sense. But I have done movies, like my second movie I did was with the Weinstein Company, when the Weinstein Company were a good company to be working with. They financed it with a UK company, and I sold the US.
When fax machines were around.
When fax machines, and I think we signed it on the fax. And the Weinsteins and Metrodome in the UK financed this film. And my partners and I, the two directors and myself and all the crew, basically any profit was ours, right? So every single territory we sold outside of the UK and the US was profit to the filmmakers, which was great. We had a sales agent selling the movie from a commission stance, which was quite aggressive, but we were making money on the territories, right? So the thing for me is I didn't enter the film business to make horror films, right? And I did that because at the time it was the best way to enter the business. It was the easiest way to shoot something which was cost effective, and probably you could look at it on the basis of maybe there was an upside for investors to potentially go and make the next Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That was my kind of, my plan with it, right? And what started to happen was I started to get a reputation in the UK as the go-to horror producer, which I was telling Jaime about 2 days ago, right?
Oh.
And people don't know it. And I didn't know that about you, right? And I said, yeah, because I did my best to not be that, right? I wanted to...
Because you might be trapped in that forever.
Right, and I didn't really want to do that. I felt like I had a lot of stories I wanted to tell, which, for me, I don't care what the genre is. I don't care if it's horror or it's thriller or it's action. I just want to tell great stories, right? And I felt like I was, not saying getting typecast, but I was not liking that reputation quite so much. I think my first 6 movies were horror, you know, and it was starting to be, this is the guy, right? Now I look at Jason Blum and I think, could have done that, right?
Yeah.
But equally, I couldn't have been further from it when I came here. The first film I did when I came to LA was Elsa and Fred, which was a Latin American, I think it was an Argentinian movie, which we remade. Beautiful movie about two people coming to the end of their lives, and it's about you're never too old to fall in love, right? And that was Shirley MacLaine and Christopher Plummer, and Jaime was in that movie.
Really?
Right?
I got to check that one out.
Yeah, so I couldn't have gone further away from it at that point. But as I said, for me, man, it's just simply about I want to make great movies, great stories, things which 20 years, 30 years time, we still talk about it over a beer, right? That's the objective.
Yeah. What's your favorite movie of all time? What's your favorite movie that you've made, and what's your favorite movie in general?
You know, I mean, I would say on the favorite movie thing, it always comes down to what frame of mind you're in, right?
Yeah.
If you're having a bad time, I'd throw The Shawshank Redemption on because I just think it's a movie about hope.
Pretty fucking,
It's great. The first film I saw in the cinema was very special to me, Back to the Future, right?
Yeah.
It's so funny. I was at this Oscars breakfast, probably a few weeks back, and they asked that question to all the producers who were up for Best Picture. And what you start to see is now a younger generation's coming in. I'm 44 now, right? The younger generation is coming in. Our reference points are now things like The Goonies, Back to the Future, right? They're the reasons why we started making movies. And Back to the Future is something which, because it was the first film I saw in the cinema and I was, 6 or 7 years old, it really resonated with me. It made me feel this is magic, right? And wanted me, and I didn't even realize it, but it inspired me to, you know, take camcorders and go and shoot stuff in car parks and stuff like that with my friends. And dude, it's gone full circle right now because I have a project which I'm developing called Great Scott, which is a homage to Back to the Future, right? And we're so privileged because Bob Gale, the co-creator of Back to the Future, is a big supporter of the movie. Loves the project, thinks it's going to be the perfect accompaniment to the brand because there's never going to be another Back to the Future. And it's been a real big supporter, liking what we're trying to do with it. It's kind of like a Blinded by the Light, if you ever saw that, about the kid who finds Bruce Springsteen, you know, and it changes his life in the UK. It's a beautiful movie. And we're trying to do something with that movie, which is, it homages, and as Bob says, is a love letter to Back to the Future, but it's about a kid in society who doesn't fit in. And in 1985, it's a different era where you don't watch a film day and date, right? And day and date in the film business means that it gets released in the same place, the same time in every country, right? Which was originally bought out to stop piracy and online piracy and things like that. But back in 1985, that wasn't the case. So in the US, in July, I think it was, Back to the Future got released. And it didn't get released till the end of the year in the UK.
Was it what year?
I think it was 1985.
85, yeah.
85. So I think it was June or July, and then December, January, I think it was, it got released. I always get my dates mixed up because I have people trying to push me to do it as a Latin American themed movie at the moment. Yeah. And the dates are slightly different between Mexico and the UK. But I think it's a really beautiful project because what it's about is, and it's so relevant to today's world, it's about a kid who doesn't fit in, doesn't feel he's enough in this world. And with social media and these kind of things, I think today more now than ever, people struggle with identity, right? And he, in our film, doesn't know himself, and his parents are divorcing and stuff like that. And his dad's this kind of character who, you know, kind of all he does is lay about and play game shows, and he wins the Price is Right game show in England and wins a trip to Florida. And whilst he's there to get away from the bickering parents, the kid goes and watches a movie, Back to the Future. And it kind of changes his outlook on life, and he decides that when he goes back to England, he's going to reinvent himself as Marty McFly. So that's what he does. So, and it becomes I think a journey for him of discovery, where he starts to realize that, you know, he doesn't need the McFly thing becomes like a cloak, right? Of this is who I I can be and I can be accepted. A bit like in Back to the Future where McFly becomes Calvin Klein. It's the same sort of thing, right? And he, but he has to he has to realize along the way that he's enough just as he is, right?
Yeah.
And I love those kind of movies because for me, they're things which it's really important to try and make stuff which people can identify with, right? Relate to.
Yeah. They can identify in a good story. You know, the big problem right now with these movies, it seems like there's no story. A perfect example, when I watched the newest Superman, Man of Steel, the first one, all these graphics and all this laser, I fell asleep. I think it's the first time I fell asleep in a movie theater. I've never fallen asleep in a movie theater. And I was like, how fucking boring was this movie? This movie was he was a cool Superman, you know. He's one of the buffest British dudes I've ever seen in my life, right? You know, it's a good Superman, it's good graphics, but the story just wasn't there.
Yeah.
Then you look at the old Superman movies, and it's like the graphics were shit. They were dog shit.
Yeah.
Somebody was moving.
But they're classics, right?
They're classic. But the storylines were so fucking amazing.
Yeah.
You know, another famous, example is the first Jaws.
Yeah.
You know, one of the reasons the first Jaws was so good, I'm sure you've heard the story.
Yep.
The shark didn't work.
Yep.
They were filming, the budget was there, let's film. They threw it in the ocean, and they never practiced it in seawater, ocean water. It fucking rusted.
Yeah.
There was no shark.
Yeah.
So what did they do? They put more to the storyline, and they added, and now it was like this suspense, and you're getting into the story and the family.
100%.
And those, it's exactly what you're talking about, that like, that's so important. But right now it's like, oh, we have CGI and we can make anything look like anything, and let's do it. And the quality of movies are kind of going down. The story of it, or I don't know if it's the story or the script, because there's things that like, it has all the potential in the world because the acting's good, the cast is good, the director's good, but then it just, I mean, I've seen so many shitty movies lately.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, and TV's got so good now as well.
Right. Netflix
is so good, and there's so many great shows. I mean,
and then you get 8 or 9 episodes to like invest in.
Yeah.
And get to be part of that journey.
Yeah.
That it almost makes it seem like, how the fuck are you going to get into an hour and a half movie?
It's true, right? I mean, I started watching, I don't know if you've seen it, started watching Shrinking. Have you seen that? It's really good.
I think you mentioned this.
Yeah, it's really good. It's Jason Segel, it's Harrison Ford. It's on Apple, and it deals with grief, right? But it does it through a psychologist kind of lens at times, right? And it's so great. It's almost like Jason Segel's there, and he's supposed to be the psychologist, kind of being the therapist to people who come in, and at times they're the therapist back to him because he just lost his wife. That's the setup of the show, right?
Yeah.
But I think TV and film and stuff like that, I mean, there's certain things which have really worked over the last few years. Afterlife, Ricky Gervais's show as well on Netflix, fantastic show.
Yeah.
And it's tapping in, and it's starting to deal with themes which were at some point they were a bit taboo, like grief. People don't want to talk about it, they don't want to see it. But the way he approached it with that humor to it, but then also the heart, is very similar to what I think is why something like Shrinking is working so well, right? Because it's got the same kind of elements to it. It's the reason why we all like Ted Lasso, right? I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, I just got into it, yeah.
But Ted Lasso's great as well because it's a fish out of water. We know this guy shouldn't be managing in the Premier League, but we kind of love him, right? And what he stands for and the way he deals with things.
The way he takes his role, and yeah.
Fantastic. And it's like, I think those kind of shows are things which inspire us all, right? To think there's a just being good to people, being nice to people, actually it can come back round, right?
How much, because it's interesting, because if you talk about movies in a positive way, like I watched this movie and it inspired me to do this, and when I watched that movie, you know what, fucking, I was going through a bad moment and it clicked, and I was like, you know what, you know, and we can give a bunch of those examples.
Sure.
How much of that exists on the negative side? Like, how many people watch a horror movie and like, oh yeah, I can do that. Oh yeah, like, oh, so that's how he used his machete, you know?
Yeah. And
like,
you're probably right. You're probably right. Inspiration kind of stuff.
I mean, the news kind of does that too when they're like, oh, this guy killed 15 people.
Yeah.
The way he did it, you know.
Yeah. No, I don't. I mean, I think that's a fair point, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't know any examples of that, but I'm sure they're out there in terms of someone emulating their favorite killer or something like that and going off and copycatting what they saw Jason do in Friday the 13th or something like that. I mean, but I feel like in my experience and knowing the horror world as I do, that audience is super loyal, super faithful. And, you know, even though you're dealing with dark themes at times, they're the most friendliest group of people, and as I said, super loyal to their art and all this kind of stuff. And the festival circuit in that particular genre is just incredible, right? It's almost like everyone kind of knows each other. I've been lucky enough to have films play in major festivals in that horror kind of circuit. And I think it's often a case where people will say horror is the culprit for some of those things, but in my experience, not the case at all, right? I would say that it's, you know, it's quite the opposite. They're the coolest people, you know. So to answer your point, I haven't seen that. Right, I've never seen that kind of happen.
Right, to that extreme.
No.
My notes say your most recent project, Madness in the Method, is notable for being Stan Lee's last ever movie.
Very true.
Can you talk about that? What it was like to work with Stan Lee and?
Well, we kind of movie we shot that
influenced you like.
It's amazing, right? I mean, we shot that movie here in Eagle Rock. We shot it here, and we then also shot in the UK because at the time Brexit was happening, right? No, I'm good at the moment, thanks, buddy. The aftermath of Brexit was going on. So what happened was currency had crashed. So for us, our financing was in dollars. Going back to your investment situation, we had to decide, how do we do this? So we came up with the kind of concept to shoot LA, right? Because the whole movie's set in LA, and establish this is an LA world, and then go and shoot. I think we shot like 25 days in the UK, right? And doubling in January and February in very cold England for Los Angeles, which we kind of pulled it off, which was a bit of a battle. But I remember I think it was the 5th day of shooting, we've been trying to get Stan. We were trying to, Jason, the director, Jason Mewes from Jay and Silent Bob, he was good friends with Stan. And what we were trying to do, because it was Jason's directorial debut, was surround him with good people, people who could really help elevate the project. And Stan was someone who we'd earmarked to do something for us. And I remember on the morning, we were supposed to be shooting in the afternoon, right? And we got a call. Stan just from nowhere calls Jason and says, "Yeah, I can do something for you now." Okay, great. Now.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, we're like, okay, it's like 9 o'clock in the morning. All the crew just shot a night shoot the night before. Then no one's going to want to come and shoot this. Yeah. So
fuck that. Everybody get over there.
Yeah. So I called Charles, who was my line producer, and I said, look, we got a code red situation here. Stan wants to shoot now. And Charles was like, it's Stan Lee, right? Stan Lee. So he calls around. The whole crew show up early, like 7 hours early or so. Straight away, fantastic, all there, on point. Now the next problem was we didn't have any scenes for him, and he wasn't in the script, so we had to write the script as we're driving over his scenes for this cameo in the movie. God. It was bonkers, you know. And he shot his scenes, and then he did this. It was incredible. So he shoots his stuff, he knows his line, gets his line, says his things, and then he says, "Look, I have to go because I have to go back. I have to go now and spend some time with my wife because we have this ritual." I think it was every dinner or every lunch or every dinner he never missed. So he had to go back to go and spend lunch or dinner with her. I forget what it was at the time. But it was an insight into a man who, even though he's incredibly successful, still had this rock solid foundation behind him where he realized, I'm going to go and do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to go and do it for a guy I like. You know, at whatever age he was, 88 at the time. He respected Jason. He respected Jason. He'd known Jay for a long time. And I think he'd seen Jay go through, he had a lot of troubles with well publicized in terms of addiction, Jason. And I think Stan had seen this kid kind of grow and seen what he'd been through. and wanted to be there, right, to help him on this moment, which was his directorial debut, which for me was just badass, right? For someone that age to come and do that, incredible. And, you know, it's one of those things, you put the calls into people, you don't think they're going to come back to you. This guy called back. Yeah, I can do it right now.
And
For you,
showed
Jay?
up.
He comes and does it, and then he leaves to go and spend time with his wife. I mean, incredible, right? And it was like, yeah, I do that every day. Go and spend, I think it was lunch or dinner. I think it was dinner. Dinner time, I always spend it with my wife every day, no matter where I am, whether she'll be with me or...
That's so amazing.
It's amazing, man. I mean, and it tells you, I think, that there's a lot of people out there and they'll talk about how you should live your life and things like that. I mean, that guy had been there and he'd done it and he was super successful. He was Mr. Marvel, and he was still there for his friends and there for his wife. Amazing, right?
How much of that do you think is it's his character because it's his character versus he's a man from like a different time, like back in those days, you know, like you said, he was 88. You know, back in his 20s, 30s, 40s, like people didn't have anything else except for their word. So like how much would you say would it be that versus this guy was like that period?
I think from what I felt was that he had a great value system, which obviously had been instilled in him, which I think is also always crucial to anyone who's going to be successful in terms of being able to, you know, kind of put that extra work in, right? Work when other people don't want to work, but also be able to have that balance of that good system behind him. I feel like he had the right, I think it's time is key, like you talk about. No internet, no distractions, focus on the things he really wanted to focus on. Great support system, someone who probably was behind him, you know,
family,
all the way.
Parents, people present, guiding them.
And value, and everything you hear about him is that, as I said, that value system which was instilled in him and what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it and the work ethic he had. But it's just, he got that balance right. Somehow it was perfect for him, right?
When you last saw him, how long was it before he passed?
Not long. As the last movie he ever shot. I don't think
like a year or two.
Yeah, I think it was probably a year. You know, because he was going to go and do Jay and Silent Bob.
What a loss.
Yeah, and then that kind of that would have been the last movie he did, but he didn't. He passed away, or he was too weak, I think, at the time to do it. Sadly. But yeah, I mean, the guy's.
He lived a great life. He lived a great life, and he left a great legacy. So, like,
he did, yeah, and we're still appreciating that to this very day, right?
Now, let's see. You've produced multiple independent movies and budgeted a total of 70, now roughly 100 million.
Yeah.
How do you approach budgeting for your projects, and what strategies do you use to ensure that your films will both be commercially successful and artistically successful?
Well, I mean, from a financing level, one of the things you want to do on projects a lot of the time is you want to try and gauge market as you develop it, right? So what we have, and we have in the film business, things like the Cannes Film Festival, which people will know about, but part of that Cannes Film Festival is the Cannes market, right? Where sales agents, who are a bit like, a crude example, they're a bit like real estate agents selling or showing the property, right? But what they're doing is they're showing the film, right? And sometimes that's a film which hasn't been made and they're trying to pre-sell it. Sometimes it's a film which has been finished. What I try to do on my projects is I try to go step by step. And my first step is, once I have before I even really work on the script too much, I already have an idea from a genre level what it is and how, as I said to you, I understand what the trailer and the poster will probably look like for this piece. And then I'll look to try and find good sales partners who are going to help me gauge the market for a project like this. Should I put Tom Cruise in it or Carl Urban in it, right, or whoever? And with them, I'll be able to then start to reverse engineer how the project is going to work for the market to ensure that it's actually something which is going to be financeable, firstly, which is half the battle, but secondly, has a chance, the best chance possible to recoup money for any investment which is in, right? Those two things are obviously crucial. And it's a real balance, because in order to do that, often in the independent world, you're looking at budgets and you're thinking, you know, I've got X actor in this who's going to charge X amount of money, right? And the more money they charge, often, unless the market responds in a positive way to them, it's you know, the film will have to cost less money to actually shoot it. You have what we call the above the line, which is what the talent kind of gets paid from. And then you have the below the line, which is what the production costs, right? In terms of how much, if you and I were in a movie compared to Tom Cruise and whoever, it's a different matrix, right? So I always look at it and I want the films to, I had a call, I remember having a call on a project with Jean-Claude Van Damme, and Van Damme says to me, he reads a script, which I send him, and the agent had told me, you know, he doesn't, you know, he probably won't give you any notes, you know, but if he likes it, you'll know, right?
Yeah.
So I get on the call, and he's got notes. I'm like, I wasn't prepared for this at all, right? You told me you didn't have any notes. And anyway, so he's got notes, and in one of his notes, which was fantastic, he said, Rob, there's too many action scenes in this movie, right? And this is a movie called Death Penalty. It's like a prison escape movie through the desert, right? It's about the last 7 guys on death row, and they escape, and these bounty hunters go after them. And there's this rogue sheriff who's decided today's the day he's going to commit suicide, finds this kind of prison bus, you know, and becomes like a dog in the bone. And it's a 3-way run and chase through the desert. Very cool popcorn movie, Mad Max meets Con Air, that kind of thing. JC reads it and he's like, there's too many action scenes, right? You're not going to be able to afford to do them well. And it was really interesting listening to him, because he was like, this circles back to your point about financing versus creativity, right? It taught me a lot, because it was like, this guy's been there and he's done it, and he's been a big star in, you know, the other side of the camera. And he's telling me in a genre, my genres were horror and romantic comedy. I hadn't done action yet. So it was like, okay, I should listen to it. I'm a great believer in, you know, the age-old thing of surrounding yourselves with people who are more successful than you. And clearly in action, he was more successful than me at the time. So I had to take that advice on board. And say,
At the time.
And I had to kind of take that advice on board and look at it on the basis of, he's right. And he had said to me, because I always, when I look at projects, I have to have what I call 4 marquee moments in the movie. It's really important for me. And I want 1 in the first act, 2 in the second act, and 1 in the third act. And for me, they're the moments where, if you and I go to the cinema or we go to the theatre, whatever way you want to define it, when we leave and we go and have a beer, we're talking about those moments. Do you remember when that happened in the film, right? They're my marquee moments. So I need 4 of them in every film. And if they start getting taken out of scripts, I start to lose interest in them, because they're the reasons why I'm attracted to the project. Anyway, Van Damme reads the script and says to me, you've got so many big moments, right? And he was so right. This was a script which was trying to do too much, right? It was trying to be something which we were trying to do it for, I don't know what, 8 million or something like that as a budget at the time. And we just couldn't afford to do it well. So it started to make me, after that conversation, hone my skills, look at it through a slightly different lens. I'm a great believer in, you know, that it's all about how you frame things and optics and stuff like that. And I started to look at the script through a different lens, based on great feedback from a guy who's been there and done it, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, he opened my eyes that we were trying to do too much. And what would have been happening would have been, we've been trying to outdo the last scene all the time, right? Because there was so many big moments in it.
Right.
So we went, actually, that script right now, we're just honing it, even a few years on. And that's what happens a lot of the time with this. Scripts get put back in the drawer, and sometimes it's a different time for it and things like that. But it didn't have that balance. It was trying to be too big for the budget. It probably would have ended up costing too much, and then the action sequences wouldn't have been so good. So now what's happened?
Too over the top.
Yeah, we wouldn't have been able to do it well, and I'm a great believer in that as well. You've got to try and do, you know, it was a genre I wasn't familiar with. Now I'm much more familiar with it. But you've got to, when you do those moments, they're your big moments in it, and you've got to sell the dream at that point. These are the moments where people are going to talk about them. So now that script is much more refined, right? And we're still honing it to a point where there's less big moments, and we're spending more time with, using your Jaws analogy, right? Character, right? And because ultimately character and story is what we care about, right? We can, I can talk to you all day long and listen to your story, right? And it's something which interests people, right?
Yeah.
So character and story are everything. And I think that's the thing where how I'm looking at my stuff. COVID was a big reset for me. I was looking at my projects, and it was one of those kind of moments where, I'm one of those guys who I wake up and I have these reminders on my phone. And every morning, one of the things which I see every morning on my phone is, why are you doing these projects, right? And it's one of those things which makes me think, why am I investing my time in this, right? It has to be something which I feel can go and do something. And I felt like some of the projects which I was doing prior to COVID, some were more money driven and some were creative in terms of really what I wanted to do. And now I'm in a position where everything I want to do it's got to have a purpose. It's got to have something, I think, thematically where an audience is going to identify with it. Because that's where I think you make something which can be important. And that's what I want to do, make important stuff, right? Stuff which, like I said, 20, 30 years time, we can have a beer and still talk about, go like you did about Jaws. You remember it, right? Yeah. It's there. It's ingrained in you, and that's always the objective.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll never forget a movie like that. I mean, the times are different, For this movie, would you consider, like, the two things that I would like brainstorm is, one, would you just make it into two parts, kind of like a Kill Bill, where it's like maybe two movies is an idea?
It's so funny because we actually started to develop it during COVID as a series. We thought it had a lot to it.
Series, yeah.
Yeah, because it's a movie which is built in the old kind of Western kind of style, like Magnificent Seven. The last seven guys escape, but it's a mid-apocalyptic world, which is basically the reason we brought it back and we're now redeveloping it is because climate change has become so big, and it presents a future to the world of what we're doing to this planet without it being too preachy and over the top. It's one of those things where thematically the whole movie's about second chances, and it presents a world where California is now just a desert dust bowl. The whole world is gone, right?
One half's underwater, the other half isn't. No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in our world,
water world,
it's sand world in this one. Bit Mad Maxy, but it's kind of. I think you've got to look at these things and try and figure out the right route for it. For us, we started to develop it as a series, and then we felt, we heard things like The Last of Us were starting to be, they were getting some traction. We thought maybe it's not the right route. So we've now at the moment going back to do it as a movie. But we see it as a franchisable project. So feeding into your point, it could be, like The Purge 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? That's where how our mindsets are now looking at it.
Right. Let me see. I think we have one more question here. Well, we have a few more questions, but we got time for one more question. What projects are you currently working on, and what can the audience expect from your upcoming work? Or is this that one?
No, I got lots of projects. I have one which is a fantasy adventure I'm going to do, and that is hopefully going to go in the summer. We're just trying to get the script honed at the moment. It's always constantly working on the script. That's the one where I'm doing it with the creator of Final Destination. He's just come on doing a pass, which I should have this week. So I have that one. I have an animation which I'm going to do. We have, a lot of big names attached to it, which I can't get into too much detail what they are. But that's basically an animation in the world of South Park, that kind of Sausage Party, that kind of adult animation about this kind of loser character who has to go and save the world and is completely ill-equipped to do so. And that's based on a very successful YouTube channel. So I have that one. I have a best-selling book out in the UK. which is a romantic comedy I'm looking to do. I have one which I'm going to do with Jaime, in fact, which is very autobiographical. It's about a British guy. It's about a British movie producer who meets a Mexican girl, and it deals with culture, and it plays around with the concept of la pedida, right? The permission, and in that story, the British guy has to get the permission from a Mexican psychologist, right? Who obviously doesn't want him to marry the daughter. And that's one we've had a load of great feedback on. It's kind of much in that kind of Meet the Parents, Big Fat Greek Wedding, that kind of world, Crazy Rich Asians it's been compared to. And I'm really excited about that. So I wrote that actually with my wife, who's Mexican. It's funny, man, at the beginning.
It's a true story, yeah.
It's a true story. At the beginning, I was making so many screw-ups in the understanding of the two different cultures. Because when you get into those kind of relationships, you just kind of think this is the way it should be, being a Brit guy, right? It's kind of how I think it should be. And my wife thinks, well, no, Mexican ways like this, right? So there was a lot of kind of cultural differences.
So different.
So different.
Yeah.
It's so different.
And then a Mexican woman.
Exactly.
Let alone not a Mexican. Like Mexico's like, but a Mexican woman's even more traditional.
Very, very traditional. So I was gonna, at the time when I started dating her, I started to make all these screw ups, and I started to make notes of them. I said, I should write a book, basically what not to do when dating a Mexican, right? And it was going to be one of those kind of pocket books you put in the airport, right? And then I started developing it with her, and I was like, this is crazy. I'm a movie producer. This is a movie. So we have that. We've developed. So we have that one, which is going to be a proposal movie. And then with the same characters, there's going to be a funeral movie and a Christmas movie at the moment, right? That's the plan with it.
Yeah.
And we're really excited about that. It's super funny, and high hopes for that. I have the Back to the Future homage movie.
That's right.
And I've got one I'm going to direct as well, which is a movie called Kindred, which is kind of like a homage to Misery. It's like a slow burning thriller, which I'm doing with Stephen Amell from Arrow.
Wow, you got your hands full.
Yeah, I like to do those things, and and I run a jewelry business. Thing I told you with my wife as well, right? She's a fantastic jewelry designer.
That's
so I
right.
kind of I kind of help her with that when she needs me.
What's her website? What's the brand?
It's called Ali Weston, ALE as in ale, right? Alejandra, aliweston.com, and she's been killing it, right? So this year she's been in Vogue. She's now got stuff in Beverly Hills, Rodeo Drive.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, and she's just doing a collaboration with Milk Jar and Cookies on Wilshire Boulevard, a fantastic cookie company down there, and she's basically created cookie jewelry. So she's doing...
That's awesome. That's going to hit good.
Dude, in the next 2 weeks, she's going to release the chocolate chip diamond cookie, which she does. And then... and she's already released one which was more of an enamel heart shaped 14 karat gold piece, and they're just, and Milk Jar is such a great bunch of people down there as well. So it's a really good collaboration she's doing. So I kind of help her on that sort of things as well, with whatever knowledge I can give from a jewelry perspective, which is not my kind of world.
Not your cup of tea.
Not my cup of tea, but business is, right? So the business side of things I can help her, but just to try and give her a platform to let her kind of design, because she's fantastic as a designer. The thing she did which made her pop was this diamond cheeseburger, which was a 20 diamond cheeseburger she carved in wax with fire and stuff like that. It's nuts.
I got to see that.
You got to see it, man. I'll show it to you. Yeah, so she's been doing her thing. So super busy, man, as always.
Well, Rob, congratulations on all your success. It's been a true pleasure knowing you. Let's do this again.
Yes, brother.
And until next time.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.